Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Just want to welcome everybody to today's webinar, which will be on understanding Geopath's reach and frequency model. I know we did this version of this webinar maybe about a month ago when the new reach and frequency model was introduced into the 2021 annual forecast. But we wanted to come back and just reiterate a few points and talk a little bit more about the model and its impact. And for that, I'm Scott Biaschetti. I'm here with Dylan Mabin today from Geopath as well.
Good morning and afternoon. Hello, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Dylan, for being here today and for helping us walk through some of this stuff. And just to kind of reiterate what the agenda is today. Wanted to take a few steps back before we went forward. So wanted to really talk about some of the relationships, the inherent relationships between reach and frequency and TRPs. And I know some of this might be kind of just a rehash for some of you on the call, but it's also, I find no matter how many times we talk about this, it's always informative. In fact, we did a whole webinar around kind of basic media math concepts maybe a month ago with Brian and AJ, who are also here on the call, by the way, in the background, helping us monitor questions. I just want to point that out. But with that, there was a lot of good, I think people really appreciated it. So I thought it would be great to just start off with that on today's call. And that helps lay some foundation as we get to the rest of the webinar. So, Dylan will come in and then talk about the new reach and frequency model and just how it's evolved over time and how our understanding of kind of people's movement has really informed then in our access to mobile data and all of our understanding has improved to help us create a more sensitive reach and frequency model. And then also showing some examples that really help us understand and help to illustrate what's going on with the reach and frequency. And as you look at putting plans together, et cetera, how you may want to think about things. And then, as always, answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I do want to ask if you can put your questions in the Q&A widget versus the chat widget. Sometimes it just gets, sometimes we might miss it if it's in the chat, if there's a lot of chat going on. So we definitely will see it if it goes into the Q&A module. With that, just want to start off with a little bit of background to set some context about kind of really what happened, how we evolved and why you might have seen, why the reach and frequency model needed to change and what has changed about it. And we'll come back to this point several times throughout the session. But, as we announced in, several different newsletters and we talked about even on the last webinar, over the past several months, we had been working to refine the reach and frequency model, right? To reflect the changes due to activity regarding the pandemic, but also, like I said a moment ago, our access to data and our understanding of people and their movement. And one of the key changes is that we moved from reported, a consumer travel survey that was conducted in 2008 and are now leveraging mobile data. So we're leveraging passively captured location data from mobile devices, which again is really helping us understand our understanding, enhancing our understanding of actual audience exposure, in particular frequency across out-of-home inventory. And this is a key aspect of the change and one that has had a big impact on the reach and frequency, and something we'll, like I said, talk about more as we get into the session. But first, like I said, I want to do a quick refresher on reach and frequency and just really talk about some of the relationships to reach, frequency, and TRPs, because it's really important as we move into the rest of the session. So what is a TRP? We get that question sometimes in our Geek Out requests, and really the basic definition, TRP, target rating points, it's a way to express exposure. So essentially impressions as a percentage of the target population. And one of the key uses of this and one of the ways it helps in planning and advertising is it helps us understand the media weight across the market. So if you want to make sure you're having the same impact in one DMA versus another, they may be vastly different in size, but you will need to purchase and have different kind of media weight, different number of frames or spots purchased in any given market to have the same impact in that market. And so that's a key thing to know about when you're thinking about TRPs and the purpose of a TRP. It kind of helps sets a standard, across the market. So as you're looking across different markets, can feel good that you're having the same impact in that market with your advertising. It's creating the same weight, so to speak. So TRPs equal total impressions, total target impressions, divided by the target population times 100. And so this is the key equation here. So TRPs equal total target impressions over the target population times 100. And it's really important as you're thinking about TRPs that your population is among that your geography is associated with the total target impressions that you're looking at, so to speak. I'll often get a question as like, well, I want TRPs, but they don't. Why are they just say in market TRPs, right? Well, it's because you have to have your population to the geography that you're looking at for your target impression. So we'd often would look at total in market target impressions and the population of that target within that market. You start to expand out and you start to include out of market impressions, you have to make sure your geography is accounting for all of the geographies where those impressions are coming from. So that's one subtlety to note as you're thinking about TRPs and using TRPs. So quick example, right? So if you have, and again, just basic math I'm showing here, so maybe not too exciting. So if you have 15 million impressions and your population of your target is 10 million, basically you have 1.5 doing that math, and then you multiply 100 and you ultimately end up with 150 TRPs. So pretty straightforward with the math there. But how does this work in practice, right? So, and as I was saying, it's really helping make those comparisons between markets. So two different markets here on the left, Salt Lake City and New York City. Population of these markets are age 18 to 49, very different, right? About 8 million people difference there. So how do I ensure that I am having the same media impact in Salt Lake versus New York? Well, that's where TRPs come in, right? So you look at trying to create that equal weight across the market allows you to do that. And you can see what that translates into in terms of impression. Again, vastly different, but again, using TRP as that guiding metric helps you understand and helps you feel confident that you're having that same impact, that same weight within the market. And again, it's due to trying to account for the different sizes of populations within the market. So I just want to pause there, check in with Brian and AJ. Any questions? I know I've been I wanted to make sure we get through this so there's enough time for Dylan to talk about some of the other broader changes. So, no? Okay. So I'll just move on, and again, stop me if there's any questions as come up around this stuff. So that leads us to reach and frequency. And again, some of this may be pretty basic for some of you, but again, I just wanted to talk about it again. So reach is really talking about the distinct people, right? How many distinct people see a particular advertisement? Each person is only counted once, no matter how many times they see the unit, right? So therefore, your reach can never go above 100% of the target population. So frequency is the other side of that. It's measuring the average number of times anyone in the market or the target audience sees the advertisement over a specific period of time. So reach, unique individuals seeing it, never greater than 100. Frequency is the average number of times they see it. So again, and if you've joined any of our other webinars on some of these topics or gone through the Learning Lab, you may have seen this example here. So again, maybe example for us, there's 10 people in our universe, right, that we're trying to reach. So reach essentially is the number of people who were exposed at least once. So in this example, we can see that 3 people weren't, so we're reaching 70% of the audience, the unique audience. But then the other side of it is how many times they see it. So we start to see the frequency of how they're seen and are able to get an average frequency from looking here. You can see, first person saw it twice, next person saw it 4 times, next person once. So I think on average here, they did the quick math before we jumped on this session. I think the average frequency here for this group is just above 2. So we're looking at, I think, at 2.4 frequency here. And so that's, again, the basics of it. But how do these 3 terms go together? How do they interact with each other? So reach, frequency, and TRPs. So reach times frequency equals TRPs. And that's an important equation to think about as we're looking and planning and thinking about some of the changes to the current model. So given this basic equation, it stands true that different relationships between reach and frequency. So reach equals TRPs over frequency. And similarly, frequency equals TRPs over reach. And so what that means ultimately is that reach and frequency are inverse to each other. So at the same, this is the key part, at the same number of TRPs. So if you're trying to reach the same TRP goal, reach and frequency, as one goes up, the other will go down. So again, as reach percent increases, frequency will decrease for the same number of TRPs. And like I said, the opposite is true when you're looking, when frequency goes up, reach percent will go down. So this is a key concept that I want to make sure we keep at the forefront as we're moving through the rest of the session. And often we get questions, again, into Geek Out, like, well, which should I optimize? What should my reach be? What should my frequency? And again, a lot of that is driven by the client needs, right? There are different times where you maybe want to focus on reach, or maybe you might want to focus more on frequency, but both are important and both should be looked at as you're looking to create a plan that isn't where reach or frequency is important. You don't want to look at one versus the one only. You do want to be looking at them together. And so, again, some ideas, just some thoughts on like when maybe frequency is something you may focus on and worry about optimizing. So if there's a lot of competitors in the market and you need to keep your message at the forefront and keep on repeating that message, or if there's low brand awareness. So if you can reach everybody in the market once, great. But if you're not repeating that, then does the awareness go away? Or if it's a low involvement purchase, that's a frequent purchase as well. Those are all times where you may want to look at or think about optimizing, frequency or focusing on frequency. And again, on the other side of it, if it's an established brand and you're really trying to just continue and keep reaching, keep the expanding your reach, is maybe a time where you want to optimize reach. Or seasonal might be another good example. Or if it's a pretty straightforward message that's easy to get out there and to push wide and far. So these are, again, just some thought starters. I don't know that there's any one specific right or wrong answer. Again, it's dependent on the client needs. It's depending on the goals of the plan, or what you're ultimately trying to do, the brand, the type of purchase. So there's a lot of factors that do go into it. We're obviously always happy to help guide and have discussions with our members. But again, I think a lot of this is often driven by kind of the client needs. So a few things to remember. Again, just a few little touch points. Again, reach, how many different people see an advertisement? Cannot add. That's an important thing to know. Frequency is the number of times a person sees an advertisement. And again, reach and frequency will occur in an inverse relationship for the same TRP level. So a couple key things to remember, and I'm going to hand it off to Dylan. Just want to see if you wanted to add anything before we jump into the next section about talking about the reach and frequency.
No, I think maybe on that one point about reach being how many unique individuals are seeing a message that goes for every single piece of inventory. So the reach is unique for every single piece of inventory, and you cannot add them because there is going to be duplication between those. There's obviously the chance that you could see one unit and the other. And that's where I think a lot of the complexity around reach and frequency and the mobile location data that we have now really diving into the understanding of people's home location really helps quite a bit to be able to define the in-market, out-of-market audience and the duplication between those individuals.
Cool.
All right, so thank you, Scott, so much. And really appreciate the teeing up of this entire conversation around that core equation that everyone should be keeping in mind throughout this, that TRPs are equal to reach times frequency, or reach is equal to TRPs divided by frequency, or frequency is equal to TRPs divided by reach. Those three components, that relationship is critically important to why people are seeing the changes that are happening. And when we talk about some of the things that have changed between old methods and new methods, hopefully this will be much clearer as to why you are seeing the results you are seeing today. So at the core of our reach and frequency methods in years past, we had relied upon self-reported travel surveys. So asking people, how often do you do this? What roadways do you travel down, et cetera? And people are kind of unreliable narrators when they come to recollection of how often they do things, where they go. Was it this week? Was it last week? How many times did they do it in the past 4 weeks? Not the best means, but it was also the only means at the time. So can't really fault people for going through that. It was very comprehensive at the time. We now have other resources that are able to help us answer this question of how often are people traveling down the same roadway multiple times over the course of a day, week, year, et cetera. And this really is the power of mobile location data, being able to observe the same device traveling down the same roadway in the same direction over time is what we were looking at when we needed to update the 2021 forecast. We knew that people's travel patterns were drastically different in some cases. So if your trip volume and your traffic volume is different, well, is your trip frequency different? So we revisited that, leveraged this new location data set that we have access to, and we'll get into a little bit of our findings in just a second. But the crux of it is that the average trip frequency in post-COVID was lower than pre-COVID, as expected. Fewer trips, lower trip frequency. But when we compared it to pre-COVID survey results, it was also much lower than what people had self-reported. So we'll get into that in a second. So let's go on to the next. Yeah, sorry, this is really the takeaway, is that the observed frequency is much lower than the previous benchmarks that we had been utilizing for average trip frequency for people going down the same roadway by a massive magnitude. So there's going to be, again, at the same TRP levels, that means if frequency is lower, reach is going to be higher. And that's an important thing to remember. So that's sort of the impact of this. But let's talk about the underlying mobile data, because I think that this is one of the most incredible things that our industry has been able to utilize over the past 5 years is the sort of, I don't want to say renaissance or the heydays of mobile location data. Smartphones are smart because often they have location context. You're looking for a coffee shop nearby. You're trying to find the directions to doctor's appointment, places you may not go very frequently. That location data, those location services that your smartphone is able to provide, the applications that you have on your phone that you're trying to get information out of, are incredibly powerful, and they're integrated all over the place. So we have access to hundreds of millions of mobile devices that are sharing this information, this opt-in information, and we can observe how those patterns anonymously are changing over time, which is really, really, really interesting. And so when we looked at what was happening in the pre and post COVID, we were seeing in areas like here in Atlanta, sort of a shift of where people were spending time. Same thing in New York City. A lot of people moving, not going to work, offices were closed. Good news is people are returning to work. New York City's opening back up. March 17th of this month, transit's going to be operating 24/7 again. So a lot of people are vaccinated, getting back to things. So that's good news. And you're seeing a similar pattern, or had been seeing a similar pattern all over the country. Chicago, same thing. Suburbs, a little more stable, but more rural areas seeing a little bit of an uptick of where people were spending time on the far periphery. So I thought this was a really interesting visual to highlight sort of what we're seeing and change over time, pre-COVID versus COVID. You're seeing basically the central business districts had been most affected. And every single market's very different. Some markets, you wouldn't notice the difference pre and post COVID, very sort of resilient to travel patterns and how people are responding to what was going on. But regardless, people are returning. We are seeing a return to pre-COVID levels of activity. And we will be, we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but we'll be releasing a mid-year forecast that reflects the current activity that we're seeing. And again, the continued recovery to pre-COVID levels of trips. So as we knew that trip volume was down, trip frequency, we also expected to be down. So I think the next slide is looking at the comparison between, this is just a week over week trips. So again, COVID hit, the world changed. We thought that we were going to see a bit of recovery in the middle of last year. And then again, we got hit with what some people were calling the second wave. It was really more that different areas of the country were seeing impact during the middle of the year. And we had been still sort of seeing this seasonal offset, but still operating at somewhat of a deficit here in this Los Angeles example. So when we're looking at the year-over-year comparison, pre-COVID levels, we were seeing over a 7-day period, the average number of trips, or average number of times that we were seeing the same device travel down the same roadway in the same direction, we were seeing about close to 2.2 over 7 days. And this day one is Monday through the weekend. And so you can see that over the course of the week, you're building frequency. This is when the majority of commute trips are occurring. So you're going to get the same behavior over and over and over again. And day 6 and 7, you're getting weekend trips, a lot of people doing things for the first time that they haven't done that week. And so again, incremental volume, but the average frequency is going to basically stabilize as you're getting a lot of people that are going down those roadways for the first time. So that's pretty interesting. But comparing it to COVID period, we saw this decrease of frequency across the board, across the country, across all different area types, across all different road types. So this is what we were looking at and what we were seeing as we were trying to understand, okay, how trip volumes change, how trip frequency changed. This is what we were observing. So this was helpful because it allowed us to have new inputs to our reach and frequency model. But when we're comparing this against what we had been doing prior to the availability of mobile location data, huge differences of trip frequency. So this is what it looks like looking at the mobile data week over week over week over a 28-day period. As you can see, the sort of the weekends where that increased frequency sort of plateaus a little bit or slows down. And then this is what we had understood from the travel surveys. So a very, very big difference, big delta between average frequency over time, one method versus the other. So no matter what we were doing, if we were going to pre-COVID or post-COVID average trip frequency from mobile device information, what we were observing, we were going to see a monumental shift one way or another as we were going from the survey methods. So forget about the trip frequency for a second. Let's talk about sort of some of the other information that we have for every single piece of inventory, which is, of course, we know the volume of trips that are going by each roadway, but we also understand the place of residence of those devices and how representative those devices are based upon the sampling rate, et cetera, of those neighborhoods. And so we basically have these unique puzzle pieces of the unique geographical coverage of every single asset. And so as these pieces of inventory start being combined into a package of inventory, an inventory set, we start seeing how they overlap. And this is where the duplication comes into play here of multiple pieces of inventory delivering impressions to audience that reside in the same neighborhood. So a couple takeaways that we want to make sure before we move on. When we released the 2021 forecast earlier this year, there was an expectation that trip volume was going to be lower across the country. That turned out to be true versus pre-COVID levels. Happy to say that the recovery has happened much faster than originally forecasted. You can see that in the impression variation report. But with lower trip volume, that means lower TRPs. With lower trip frequency, that means that reach may stay the same, in fact. But when we're moving from the self-reported frequency to observed frequency, this is where we're going to be seeing a big shift when we're looking at the reported metrics. So why is this important? So the shift to updated observed frequency, again, is lower per unit than previously reported. So that's been the biggest change. And going back to that equation, given that reach frequency and TRPs are related in the way that we described, if reach is going down, therefore, if frequency is going down, therefore reach must go up at the same TRP level. So we're going to go ahead and hop into a little example now of how this plays out when you're utilizing some of our tools. So if you're in the Workspace market plan module and the Insight Suite, we're going into here. We're going to walk through sort of a scenario. I'm looking at transit shelters here. That's the media type that I'm going to build this plan around. And my goal here is 100 weekly TRPs. So with that, I can then see, just looking at that media type across the marketplace, this is all of the transit shelter locations of the three largest transit shelter networks in the New York DMA, JCDecaux, Insight Street Media, and AR James and Company. But every single one of these is very unique. And so they each have their own footprint and their own inherent coverage of the audience that resides inside of the New York DMA. If you go to the next slide. So what we're going to do here is we're going to enter in those goals, and then what results is the 100 TRPs of transit shelters, and it's allocating them evenly across JCDecaux, Insight Street Media, and AR James and Company down at the bottom. And you can see the metrics for each one of these inventory sets themselves, and then the cumulative reach and frequency metrics for that set. And as you can see, reach is not the cumulative reach is not just the sum of the individual reach. It's close, because each one of these media networks has a very unique footprint in the marketplace, which you'll see. But the only way that you can really get cumulative reach across inventory is by going through this process of either the market plan or sending in the specific inventory into the inventory plan. And that's obviously within the Insight suite, but there's lots of other applications that are tapping into the Geopath API so you can get the same functionality out of. So we go to the next one. So one of the things that I think is really helpful when you're looking at the geographic coverage of a marketplace or the dispersion of inventory across a marketplace is also how that coincides with the demographic dispersion or the target audience dispersion across the marketplace. So on the left are all the transit inventory locations for those 3 operators in the marketplace, and on the right is the total volume, a heat map, a choropleth map of the volume of the population by county in the marketplace. And there's a total of 30 counties in the New York DMA. If you wouldn't mind going to this next slide. So each one of these media networks is going to have its own unique contribution inherent because of where they're physically located. And so each one of those counties or each one of those roadways is going to have unique areas from within the market that they're drawing audience. The JC code inventory on the left is going to be able to get audience from all over the marketplace, but it's going to be really good at getting local audience. Transit shelters are on local streets, they're in residential neighborhoods because of their tie-in to being able to use them while you're waiting for the bus. Same thing, Insight Street Media getting Westchester and Long Island, and then AR James getting lots of New Jersey and even South Jersey. So if we were to split up, as the application did, the TRPs across these 3 media types, different average TRPs per unit. So to get 33 TRPs, JC you need 90 units, Insight Street Media 135, AR James and Company 111 on average. So for a combined total of 336 units, total 100 TRPs. But what I also am showing here is the 1-week reach and 4-week reach of each one of these individual media networks to show that they have their own unique contribution that they are providing to this this campaign, this hypothetical plan. And then when we are looking at the dispersion of the inventory against the population dispersion, you see that it is obviously those transportation networks are going to be around some of the more more densely populated areas of marketplace. And so you're seeing this sort of overlap of those high population counties versus the inventory itself. And so what this plan is saying is that we are reaching about 61% of the population, the target population, over that 4-week period using these 336 pieces of inventory. If you can go to the next one, just to provide context, the areas shaded in purple, those 15 counties, those top 15 counties of population volume in the DMA contain 80% of the DMA population. So you're going to get a lot of coverage in those areas, obviously less so of some of the northern counties, northwestern counties within the New York DMA. So I thought that this was a really good example that showed how each one of these each media network portfolios had a unique sort of coverage in and of itself, the ability to reach a specific part of the market, but when combined, can be used to understand the total reach of the marketplace. And that's it for me on that example.
Great. Thank you, Dylan. And, I just wanted to, Dylan mentioned this, and we can start to jump to some questions, but I also just wanted to make sure we did talk about a couple things coming up, because again, I know that they're important, and I will answer a couple of the questions that came in. So we released a newsletter last week, and I think it was also picked up in some of the out-of-home media about the fact that we are going to be releasing a mid-year forecast this year, the first time ever for the organization. And it does fit into the long-term goals of where we want to help the industry go in terms of more frequent releases of forecasts. But for this year in particular, the fact that the recovery, the pace of the recovery has quickened, we felt it important that we do an annual forecast in June, a mid-year release, as we've been calling it. And just it's important to note that that mid-year release will be a 12-month forecast, and it will be the expected audience delivery from June 2021 when it's released through May 2020. And also, we talked about potentially some, looking at the reach and frequency model as it is, and if any refinements do need to be made to it, those will happen in that mid-year annual forecast. The model has come out and it is in the tool already, but again, as we look at it and pressure test it and look at it more, as any refinements, we've been asked, like, when would that occur? And so they will be incorporated into the June 2021 forecast. Anything, Dylan, you want to add to that or clarify a little bit more than I was able to just now?
No, I think that answer also answers some of the questions that were in the Q&As, that the reach and frequency, updated reach and frequency was part of the initial 2021 forecast. The mid-year 2021 forecast is going to be updated. We are going to be updating the reach and frequency model. We are seeing higher trip volumes. We're going to be seeing higher trip frequency, and then that's going to be reflected in those metrics.
Cool. There's one question I think you may have hit on it already, but maybe worth going back to. So is question about, is the lower trip frequency specific to COVID, or is it what we would have anticipated as part of the new model? I think it's maybe worth reiterating. I think you may have touched on it already.
Yeah, so let's maybe go back to one of those previous slides. So the previous reach and frequency, I don't have to worry, I know some of the metrics, but the previous average trip frequency that was being used in the models was assumed like 4.2 on average per week. Now, when we looked, and if you can go to the other slide, there you go. When we went and looked at the average trip frequency for pre and post COVID, both of them were vastly different from that 4.2 metric. So even going to pre-COVID, going to an observed frequency, we would be seeing vastly different results going from surveys to observed trip information. But we also saw in 2020 a lower trip frequency, and this was due to changes in travel behavior due to COVID. So a little bit of both, and what you're seeing in the original 2021 forecast, the mid-year forecast, now that many markets have either fully recovered or very close to being recovered, or we're going to be expecting full recovery over the next 12 months, you'll see trip frequency levels closer to this blue line that you see on the screen.
Great. Cool. Thank you for that, Dylan. So I just wanted to go through a couple more things. And so as you're finishing up, if you do have any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A widget. Also wanted to, as I'm just getting back to the slides, wanted to let you know, also you can reach out to us at geekout@geopath.org if you think of questions afterwards. There's also some additional support materials we have. There's a what we call a reach and frequency primer that we put out, as well as a little more information, a one-pager cheat sheet, so to speak, on our reach and frequency model. So this is available as actually one document in the Geek Out library. Plus, there's also a lot of kind of media math one-pagers if you ever need any information on that. You want just a quick refresher. Also, just even more information is available in our Learning Lab, and also in the Geek Out library in terms of training videos, in terms of training decks, et cetera. So there's a lot of information there. on all of this. Also, if you ever want to catch up on any of the old out of home office hours, again, they're here as well. I know we've mentioned that this webinar will be available on our website pretty quickly after this session. If you anybody on your team that you want to share it with or watch, but also as I said, there's other webinars like the one we did a few months ago on this that you can just catch up on and look at as well. And also want to make a plug for our next measurement and methodology session. So this is a series we launched this year. Really, again, I'm wanting to go back to the basics a little bit. We did a session 2 months ago on kind of media math, media measurement, and last month we did, or a few weeks ago actually, we just did a session on understanding the roadside methodology. And we're going to keep on going through all of these foundational concepts. We want to make sure all of our industry is aware and ready and able to speak to some of the changes going on in the industry as well. So just want to make a plug for that. And again, as always, reach out to us at geekout@geopath.org. And we're happy to answer any questions. If we don't get to all of the questions today, we're happy to reach out individually, or happy even to reach out to anyone, as you email questions to geekout@geopath.org. So just wanted to check in with the any of the questions. Is anything that Dylan that you saw that came in that we didn't get to address just yet?
No, I think we're good. Thanks everybody for all your questions. If you have additional, like Scott said, please reach out to Geek Out. We can go through any examples of inventory plans you have questions with. I know these are big changes for some packages. A lot of folks are seeing numbers different from what they've seen. That's to be expected. Let us know if you need any help talking with media operator or with agency partners, clients, et cetera. We're happy to help.
Great. Just one quick question came in about reach frequency being available for a specific duration. So that is available in the Insight Suite if you need to. And again, we can help you if you do have we can jump on a call with you and show you how to get that, but you can do custom time periods in the inventory planning module. So happy to help show you how to do that if you do have any questions on that. So just want to make sure we answered that quick question just came in as we were signing off. So hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you for joining. And again, I don't want to say, I don't think I can say it enough. If you do have questions, if you need help with anything, reach out to geekout@geopath.org. We're always happy to do our best to try to help. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it and have a good weekend.